Okay, for those of you who are baseball fans, and perhaps for those of you who are not, one of the reasons I wanted to start this channel today is one, because I had time, but also when I found out today was supposed to be opening day for baseball, I figured, what the hey? I mean, there's no perfect time for that. I mean, that was the very first sport I ever watched, as far as I can remember, and the first one I watched in earnest for sure. Baseball's a tricky sport when it comes to resuming because even though it's supposed to start today, there's time to still get in half the season or so, even if it doesn't start until June 1st, let's say. Now, when you start going beyond that, then you start affecting things such as the All Star game, which is typically played in July. It'd be kind of hard to only play a couple weeks and then have the All Star game, so chances are, my guess would be anything after, let's say, the middle of June, you're probably not going to have an all-star game, and you might have a season with 100, 115 games maybe, and maybe as few as, let's say, 80. And I don't think you want to go less than 80 games, and I really wouldn't even feel comfortable with 80. To me, wouldn't want to see less than 90 games, really, but 85 you could do. That's still more than half the season. But the same thing, if baseball doesn't resume by, let's say, I would say June 20th as an arbitrary date, I think that would be very difficult. With that having been said, let's say we are able to resume it. There's been history about this for sure with work stoppages due to the strike and that. Been some interesting things. In '81, the Cardinals and Reds had the best record in baseball, but neither one of them made the playoffs because of the split season. And I've been thinking of a way to try to work this as best I can, and I sympathize with Rob Manfred for trying to find a way to appeal to everybody because I don't think on this he's going to be able to. But to me, the simplest thing to do is you're going to have to just select a date, and yes, you're going to have different teams playing different number of games. I don't know that there's any way to work around that. If there is, I would love to see somebody come up with a solution to that so that everybody can play the same number of games, but I don't see that happening. I see it being an arbitrary date if there's any baseball this year, and you have X amount of the season, like I said, possibly as few as 85 games. But still, you have that. You still can have the playoffs and the like. I'm not a proponent of what I read about remodifying the playoffs, though being the traditionalist I am, I certainly liked it, when when you only had one set of divisional playoffs and you didn't have, wild card teams and all that stuff like they have now. So baseball has got its hands full, but yet they haven't started their season, unlike the NBA and NHL. And like I said, this is where I think the NFL is in the catbird seat because they've already completed their season. They're going to have their draft when they normally do, and presumably they're going to start their season on time because by the time it does start, all of this theoretically, and I hope, is a subject of the past, at least, in terms of it being a pandemic. I mean, the disease itself may not go away for many, many years to come, but the pandemic hopefully by that time will. Because can you imagine what the morale of the country, sports or otherwise, is going to be if this drags through to, let's say, even Thanksgiving? And I don't want to get off on that subject, and it's not one I really want to think about. But there have been people I know who have made comments to me that have made me think about this a little bit. But keeping it and getting back to the subject of baseball, I think it's going to suck to have a summer where we don't have some degree of sports. We already know we're not going to have the Olympics this year. But can you imagine not having baseball? We already don't have the Indianapolis 500. And since I mentioned that, I'm going to talk about this as well in this segment. The Indianapolis 500, I think, for those who still watch it, know that it's not what it used to be. It just switched networks, as a matter of fact, after its long-standing relationship with ABC last year to NBC. I don't know what its ratings were in its first year. I don't remember what they were. But as we all know, I mean, you don't have AJ Foyt or Mario Andretti or even Rick Mears out there racing anymore. Now it's just dominated by a bunch of foreign drivers. And while theoretically some might be okay with that, I'm not one of those people. And it bothers me that the American drivers either have no interest in that or they go on to other sports or whatever the case is, to the point where this is now a foreign dominated event and has been for, I would say, 20, 25 years now, thereabouts. It's sad to me because I remember the days of Rick Mears. I remember him winning. I don't remember AJ Foyt winning. I'm not that old, but Rick Mears I certainly remember winning. I remember Al Unser Jr. winning. I mean, it was always good to see an American win. Whatever it is, I want to see the Americans win. Who wouldn't? Who bleeds red, white, and blue? But let's face it, the Indianapolis 500 is not what it used to be, and outside of qualifying, it's essentially a one-day event. And even with qualifying, you're only talking about 2 or 3 days in whole, even though the whole month of May used to be dedicated to it. Now it's down to a couple of weeks. It's just not what it used to be for so many reasons. So that going by the wayside, I don't think it's going to bother people like the Kentucky Derby going by the wayside. Or in the next segment, I'm going to talk about the PGA season, and then I'll wrap it up by talking about the NCAA men's and ladies tournament. Stay tuned on the Ed Sports Network, or Sports Channel rather.